And we are now recording.
We don't have the nice voice. All right, I'm going to call us to order for a Springfield City Council work session with roll call.
Neil, I'm happy to jump in on that. Mayor Van Gordon.
Here.
Councilors Moe.
Here.
Councilor Rodley.
Here.
Councilor Stair.
Here.
Councilor Woodrow. Councilor Pictionary.
Here.
And it looks like we have one item tonight, which is the budget adjustment discussion with Nate Bell. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nate.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we're looking for direction from you in regards to some proposed adjustments we would like to make to the fiscal year 22 budget. We kicked off the 22 budget season back in October. We brought you in late October in work session a 5-year forecast. We opened up the city's budgeting software in December to departments to enter that budget, and we are now here in late January getting close to closing down that system to start preparing the materials for the coming budget committee meetings, which will happen in late April and early May. And, you know, in those budget committee meetings or in the budget committee process, we like to bring you a balanced budget where we've done a lot of the work in the hopes that we're close to where you'll want to be in terms of an adopted budget. Back in June, when we made some reductions to the fiscal year 21 budget, we mentioned that we'd be coming back to you in the fiscal year 22 budget process with some potential additional reductions. Working with our executive team and with a continually updated 5-year forecast to provide the context, we're coming forward again with some additional reductions, and we just want to get the thumbs up if we're moving in the right direction. So I want to start this conversation looking at the most recent 5-year forecast. And as always with these work sessions, it doesn't have to just be me speaking with a canned presentation. Feel free to jump in at any point with questions. Can everyone see this in its entirety? All right, some things I'd like to point out here is that it's actually improved since the last 5-year forecast at the end of October. I think the two largest things driving that improvement, and I think it's improved by roughly bottom line over the course of 5 years by $1.5 million. That's resulted from some new numbers from the state in regards to PERS that has improved the PERS outlook, as well as our ambulance fund, some adjustments we've made to the 5-year forecast there that has also improved that outlook, which has resulted in a smaller subsidy over those 5 years. With that being said, in fiscal year 22, as you can see from this forecast, we're looking at an ending cash of around $8.2 million ending reserve. And that is right at 20% of operating costs. And something we've talked about in the past is that we like our ending cash as a percentage of operating expenditures come in the 20 to 25% range is what's considered healthy. Closer to 25% is ideal. But we've always described 20% as the floor of what we don't want to go below. So at the end of fiscal year 22, our forecast has us right at that floor, and then going below it in fiscal year 23, dropping down to 17%. I think the other thing you'll take note of on this forecast is that we, in fiscal year 22, have a deficit spend of roughly a negative $1.3 million. That means that our expenditures exceed our revenues by roughly 1.3 million. And you know, while there can be reasons for having a deficit spend, it's again not something that we'd like to see. So this is really the context that we're coming to you with some additional reductions. And we'll get to those in a few moments. I think the biggest thing I want to address here is that, and this is a question that gets asked a lot in regards to these 5-year forecasts, is that a lot of times we'll have over those further out years some scary numbers, some challenging numbers, and it feels that it doesn't always come to fruition. And so one of the things we're really working on here is to really true this up and give you as accurate of a picture as we can with all the current information that we have. This is not a doom and gloom forecast. In fact, we have built in a number of items that we expect to materialize, but if they are not to materialize, could have a significant impact. Built into this 5-year forecast is what we call underspend. When we set our budget, we set a legal level appropriation that we are not to exceed. And this is for each department. So we'll have essentially roughly 10 legal level appropriations within the general fund. All 10 of those departments have to come in at or under. We typically end up with an underspend each year. That underspend basically varies from about 800,000 to $1 million across all 10 departments. We've built that underspend into this 5-year forecast. Additionally, Neil brought you the good news in regards to Marcola Meadows last week in regular session. We have built in our forecast on what that development can bring in property taxes into our projections here as well in this 5-year forecast. In fiscal year 23, we have a number of enterprise zone exemptions that are expiring. We don't know what the value of those assets will be that come onto our tax rolls, but working with Courtney Griesel in economic development, we've made a guess at that, and we've incorporated the potential tax revenues generated from them coming back onto the rolls into this forecast. And lastly, we have some in lieu of negotiations that are going to be happening here in the future with the expectation that could also bring some additional revenue to the general fund, and that's been incorporated as well. In regards, and I think I talked about this in October, in developing our property tax projections, we consulted the county and some guidance that they put out. The guidance that they put out is what I would describe as a one-size-fits-all, meaning it's information that is meant to guide all communities across the county, regardless of the makeup of their tax rolls. So we actually looked specifically at our tax roll and what constitutes our primary revenues and our expectations. And our projections are actually quite a bit rosier than the guidance that the county has put forward. So again, knowing that we're making adjustments to our budget, we wanted to make those adjustments on what we consider to be very sound and solid numbers. So I'm going to pause there. Any questions? And I just see 5, because I'm sharing my screen, 5 windows, and one of them is mine. So if someone has their hand up, I don't see it. I'll need someone to call.
Yeah, I don't see anybody's hands up.
Okay. So a couple other things I guess I'd like to mention here is if you look at fiscal year 20 and 21, we were making contributions to a building preservation reserve of 400,000 and to a ADA reserve of 100,000. And in each of those years, we pulled that out in fiscal year 22. The numbers just didn't allow us to continue making that contribution. That's concerning to us, but you know, based on what we're seeing, it didn't seem prudent. Let's see. Additionally, we're showing you the ambulance fund contribution that has been updated since the last 5-year forecast. We've found that those numbers tend to come in a little more conservative in terms of their projections and haven't always come to fruition. So that is one area that could provide us a little bit of wiggle room. But you know, what we are seeing is a trend towards eventually a subsidy to our ambulance fund. And I use that word subsidy loosely because we've discussed that a portion of our first response is within our ambulance fund. Even if we were to get out of the transport business, there's a significant expense that would then come back to the general fund. So it makes sense for us to do some level of subsidy up to a certain point. And I think that's it. I'm going to scroll past the ambulance fund. If you look at this forecast, we're actually...
Nate, Corey's got a question.
Okay.
You're still on mute, Corey.
That's my first you're still on mute today, and I'm on Zoom all day long, so I'm fading. I appreciate this, and I have a couple of questions about those reserve funds that you mentioned, the building reserve and the ADA projects. So
Okay.
are those money that was going into a reserve and that is still sitting there, or was it being used as it was being put aside?
No, that money has not been used and it is sitting there. So at the end of fiscal year 21, we should have around $800,000 set aside for deferred building maintenance and $200,000 for upgrades to ADA facilities here at the city.
Okay, and then my second piece of that question, not that I want to hog things up, is are there plans to use that? I know that there are often requirements to bring, whether crosswalks or buildings up to ADA compliance, and it can be really hard for municipalities to get to that, but we often have a plan like, often by the time you get halfway there, you start all over again because the compliances have changed. But I wondered if there is already planned to spend that on those projects, or if it's going to sit there until we all decide what to do with it.
It's a good question. So I'm probably not the best person to answer this. I do know that on the development and public works side, as they do work on city infrastructure, they tend to bring it up to standard and use their own reserves to fund that. I also believe that there was a study done on work that needs to be done here at the city. I think it was done in our HR department. And at this point, it's just a matter of bandwidth to start picking up some of these projects and moving with them. And this is kind of ties in with today's kind of maybe larger conversation. Is what we're trying to do here as an organization is make reductions without impacting outward facing services. And we're really bringing this right down to the bone at this point. So what that doesn't really tell you is while we may not impact outward facing services, we are impacting our capacity to do work that goes above and beyond what we're typically doing now. And those types of projects would fall exactly into that category. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for or wanted. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to it.
Thank you. It gives me more context. Thank you.
All right. So
Councilor Mo's got questions.
all right.
You have to educate me. The ambulance fund expenses cover exactly what? Is it just the ambulances and crew, or does it also cover the ambulances plus the 2 fire trucks that always go with it? Is that charged to the ambulance fund or not?
Again, I'm going to speak to this to the best of my ability. If we wanted a really accurate answer,
That's all I need.
but our ambulance is part of our response to any incident in terms of the number of bodies that need to show up. So it, from my understanding, only funds the ambulances and those personnel that are tied to those ambulances.
Okay.
Not to the actual engines and personnel.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I do not see anybody else, so I think we can keep going.
I won't spend a lot of time here on the ambulance 5-year forecast. On the general fund side, we built the subsidy to the ambulance fund into the forecast. On the ambulance side, we didn't build the subsidy from the general fund in there, only because I wanted to see what we were wanted you to see what we were responding to when we built that into the general fund. And this brings us to the document that we're looking for guidance from you. These are some additional reductions that we'd like to incorporate into the fiscal year 22 budget. Let's start with police at the bottom. Originally, this was a reduction that we had put forward back in June, but based on some feedback we received from council prior to that, we had removed and put forward the body-worn cameras. Council chose to keep the body-worn cameras in the budget, but we never revisited the other potential reductions. And we were comfortable with that, knowing that we'd be coming back to you with the reductions that they had originally put forward. In working with the chief, these are reductions that he believes he can absorb without impacting outward facing services. These also would not result in the layoff of actual individuals. These are positions that are currently vacant and have been vacant for some time. Typically, these positions have really been used at a legal level to help them absorb their overtime. So by making these reductions, it's just going to create a more challenging budget for police in terms of overtime. But again, it's something that they believe they can manage.
Hey, Steve, did you have questions? I saw you waving your hand.
I did. I like these. The reduction of a community service officer at this time, I don't think is good for our public image. I don't know. I don't have any other alternate, but that bothers me. We need our public image is pretty bad out there, and if we can get officers or police out there that can help deal with the public and soften that, we need to do that. That's all.
Corey?
I guess my I hear what you're saying, Counselor Moe, and my follow-up question to that would be, how many community service officers do we have? Because I think we don't just have one, so there may be others, unless I'm making that up.
So again, I could try to speak to this, and hopefully I'm accurate, but if Chief Lewis is available, he might be a good person to speak to this.
Nathan, if you give me just a moment, I can make it so he is able to speak.
Nancy, do you want to jump in here?
Yes, I would. Thank you. And I can't answer the question on the number of community services officers. That would be for the chief. But I would like to just point out that this is a position that is currently vacant. So it's not a cut. So we will not be reducing what we have currently. I do understand and appreciate Councilor Moe's comment about, having a presence in our community. We are currently going to be advertising for a position in the police department that will have this kind of element to it, outreach kind of element, as well as public information officer. So we're kind of enhancing that through a new position that we're recruiting for.
I just got a text from Jessica Crawford, the police analyst. There are 3 CSO positions. And I think specifically the 2 positions that we have up here, one is a CSO and one's a record specialist. Both have actually been vacated since late 2000. I want to say 2007 and 2009 are the 2 years. So we're talking a long time. This won't have an impact in terms of the services we've provided, at least for the last decade.
Thank you.
Bill?
You call me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it may be helpful if the counselors knew what the community service officer job entailed, because I think there may be some confusion.
Can I jump in here? Would that be helpful? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that would be helpful, Chief.
Okay. So right now, and Jessica is right, that job has been vacant for quite some time, and we've used it as Nathan described earlier, kind of a budgetary issue to cover some of our overtime. There are a number of CSOs. There was originally 4 CSOs in the patrol division, and then we had that one reduction in there that we held vacant. That's the one we're proposing to be reduced right now. So the community service officers out there providing a service to our citizens go out there and take reports that typically don't have suspect information. They handle a lot of our crashes that don't require police officers to handle the accident scene. So they do, and they serve subpoenas, they do evidence collection, they do a number of varieties that doesn't require a sworn police officer to do. It's paid at a little bit of a reduced cost than a police officer, and the training is not quite as extensive, but they do provide an incredibly valuable service to our citizens. But I really feel that the reduction of this officer, this community service officer position, will not have an outward impact on the service delivery. As mentioned earlier, it's been vacant for a number of years.
All right, Leonard.
Thanks, Mayor. So my understanding was that one of the community service officers was primarily assigned to outreach in the Latinx community. Is that correct?
Yes, and so I think the confusion is created. There's actually four in patrol, and then there was 2 in our community outreach, and that's the positions that we have to make outreach to the public. And then, as the city manager mentioned earlier, we are going to have a kind of a hybrid position of community outreach / PIO position coming open, which is one of those community service officers.
All right.
Some of those are out of the general fund, and some of those come out of the levy.
But the CSO that is primarily assigned to the Latinx community would not be affected by this cut. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I also wanted to ask if there was just some sort of a triage done about it looks to me like most of these cuts are one full-time employee in each department. Is that correct, Nate?
Well, no, we have, one of them is a reallocation of a position that wasn't filled and is now being fulfilled by our assistant city manager. And then the other 2 are yet to be determined. Their dollar amounts kind of based on a certain percentage and proportionality of what we've done in other outward facing central service type departments. But you know, we haven't provided any specifics in regards to those because we're still looking at the outward facing impact and whether or not that's really doable, but it's an aspirational goal for us.
Okay. My other question would be, was there any consideration given to voluntary furloughs and access to the state work share program in order to assuage the need for permanent reductions in these departments?
In regards to voluntary furloughs, we've done those in the past. What we have found is they typically don't generate the type of reduction that we really need to address the budget issues we're having. The other thing is these would be ongoing reductions. Typically, a voluntary furlough is a single year. It's challenging to get people to agree to a permanent furlough, if even possible. So it makes it a challenging tool to use. It's a good tool when you're looking at just a single year gap that you're trying to overcome, but when you're trying to overcome a long-term structural imbalance, it doesn't always become the best tool.
Okay.
I'm familiar with that state work program you're
I just got one more question. I know that there's some programs that are probably due to sunset in the next year or 2. I know we've been working with a PR firm to rebrand the city, for instance, and that program is probably scheduled to wrap up. Was that taken into consideration in the budgeting?
It was. That was a one-time expenditure, and that actually came out of some dollars that we had set aside for the council for initiatives out of a Comcast settlement. Yeah, that wouldn't be in future years. It should be complete in fiscal year 21, if I understand correctly.
All right. That's all I got right now. Thanks.
So Nate, when we look at these general fund reductions, when at the top of the AIS, none of these were baked in, right? So that the first page was essentially where we were right now, but it excludes anything on this list because we haven't okayed it yet.
Exactly. I don't want to assume anything. And so we would have a new updated 5-year forecast if we were to incorporate these reductions into our budget.
Okay.
I could roughly tell you what it does is it brings fiscal year 22 up to around 21%, and it brings fiscal year 23 to around 19%, which is an excellent position for us to be in for the next 2 years as we continue to work on solutions to address the longer term issue. Another thing that I'd like to accomplish here is we're kind of coming to that end of that runway in terms of actual reductions that we can make without impacting services. And at this point, and I need to be working on this concurrently as we work on the fiscal year 22 budget, is to start looking at potential proposed service level changes, as well as increases to existing revenues or potentially new revenues. And those will be additional discussions that we hope to bring in front of you over the coming months and years.
So this isn't the last set of reductions that we're going to, the last conversation about this that we're going to have.
These is, I would call these the last conversations on reductions that don't include painful, difficult decisions.
Okay. Anybody else have questions or comments? Steve?
Somebody mentioned Marcola Meadows, the property taxes that we're going to be getting out of that eventually. Is that reflected in this, or is that just something in the future that we can look forward to?
No, it's reflected in this.
Okay. If I was a rich man and built $100 million building downtown, how much in property taxes for the city would that generate? Just an idea.
Well, let's use a project that's actually in front of you right now that could come to fruition, and that is the share project we've been discussing. That's a $27 million project, 85 2 and 3 bedroom units, and that will generate increment in the neighborhood of around $200,000.
Thank you. That's good.
Now, that being said, though, that is increment to the entire taxing district. That wouldn't all come to the city. In the short term, because it's in an urban renewal district, it would come to the urban renewal fund. But then when that district sunsets, then that would get divided with our partners as well, which would include the county, the school district, and Willamette Lane.
Sure gets complicated, doesn't it? Thank you.
Are there any other questions or some sort of head nod about that whether or not this reduction proposal is okay? All right. Nate, do you have anything else we got to cover?
No, I think that's it.
So I know, and maybe to kind of help us understand about how we're working into the budget again, I know this is coming up. Are we going to have, is this the last conversation we're having in a work session before we move into budget committee, or is there another conversation coming up?
There's one more conversation. I think it'll be an easier conversation. And that's on February 16th, and it's regarding our process this year. We are still in COVID. And so we need to talk about what the process will look like again, if it's going to be done remotely, and the number of days, and whether we're going to do the pre-recorded department presentations. So we'll work on a proposal and be bringing that to you in mid-February.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other last minute comments? Then I think we're good. That was the only item. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
All right, thank you.
We are adjourned.